Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on cultural intelligence and the future of work. We apologize for the slight delay. There was a little bit of a tech hiccup. So anyway, for those of you who might be new to the NBS Knowledge Lab series, this is the Nanyang Business School's thought leadership platform to share some of the latest research insights, management insights and thinking from faculty and industry leaders from around the world. And today we do have two very distinguished global leaders with us. But before I introduce them, let me do a quick introduction of myself. I'm Professor Prof Kok-Yee, the Director of Research at the Center for Leadership and Cultural Intelligence at the Nanyang Business School. CLCI, in short, is the world's first cultural intelligence research center because the research, the concept and the measurement were birthed here right in the center and started by Professor Soon Ang slightly more than 2 decades ago. And the mission of the center is to lead in the knowledge, the assessments, and the programs for growing culturally intelligent leaders and organizations. And with me today is my fellow colleague at the center, Professor Thomas Rockstool, and he is the Director of Psychometrics at the center. We've done a lot of research on CQ together, and I'm going to pass over to Thomas to introduce our two speakers.
Thank you, Kok-Yee. Welcome, everybody, for this webinar. We are very honored to have two distinguished speakers today who are very, very special in the sense that they are not only very deep into the practice of CQ, as I will elaborate in a second, but both of them have also done research with us on CQ, so they are bridging the research and the practice gap in that sense as well. The first speaker I'd like to introduce is Tatsuo Hidaka. He's the Vice General Manager and for Corporate Culture Office at the Rakuten Group. He is a very distinguished OD and HR expert with many, many years of experience in Rakuten. Some of his key areas of focus there are the corporate culture bridging, especially during post-merger integration. And he's also currently spearheading the global talent acquisition for the Rakuten Group. Tats has also extensively conducted research in collaboration with different academic institutions. For example, he has worked with us on creating virtual reality training for developing people's CQ and evaluating the effectiveness of the training. Our second speaker today will be Dr. Stefan Seiler. He is a member of the Group Executive Board of the UBS Group and also head of the Group Human Resources and Corporate Services there. Stefan, in his role, ensures the effective and efficient alignment of the people, real estate, vendor management, communications, branding, and marketing strategies to support the overall strategy of and success of UBS. He has been with UBS since 2011, also holding multiple leadership roles, in particular in the HR field, serving as a global head for talent and recruiting in UBS. Stefan started his career with the Swiss Military Academy at the ETH in Zurich, where he was also a researcher on leadership. And at that point in time, we also collaborated with him on some research on CQ and their leadership. So we are very pleased to have both of them here with us. I think Stefan still had some issue with the time difference, so we're hoping that he'll be able to join us in a second.
Yes, so Stefan is definitely connecting, and while we wait for him, this is how we will organize our conversation and dialogue with our speakers. And I also want to thank all of you for giving us your questions in advance. So the way we're going to do this is to maybe think about our conversation in 3 segments. I'll start by setting the stage and getting our speakers to share a bit about the trends and the challenges they observe in the workplace involving cultural diversity, because that's the core phenomenon we're talking about. And with that, we'll then really dive into cultural intelligence, some of the science behind it, and importantly, the solutions and the strategies that UBS and Rakuten have developed over the years to address the challenges. And finally, we'll wrap up with looking into the future. A number of you have given us questions about what's the future of CQ, and especially with AI. So I think that's a good way to kind of wrap up the discussion. Now, before I invite our speakers to maybe set the stage and share with us their observations. I'd like to first define what culture and diversity is, because I do recognize that different people may attach different meanings to the word. So for culture, in a nutshell, we define it simply as a set of shared rules of a group of people. And if you think about it, the moment we have more than two people or more than two people coming together, that already poses a challenge, right? Because the way we think, we behave might be very different, which is why culture is important, because it offers that common understanding. And in terms of what groups of people we're talking about, if you look at the slide here, we have a mnemonic called Orange's PDF that basically just outlines 10 major kinds of diversity, and they are not constrained to these 10 types to begin with, but these are the common ones. So cultural diversity is definitely not just national diversity or ethnic diversity, but it goes across organizations, professional disciplines, and so on and so forth. Anything that you can think about that binds people together as a group. So in a nutshell, I want to say it is a very broad phenomenon. And even if you're in a domestic setting, you certainly can still find a lot of diversity within it. So with that, maybe let me start by, I'll just invite Tats to maybe kick us off by sharing, Tats, what are some of the observations or challenges you've seen in your industry or your organization involving diversity?
Yeah, thank you, Kok-Yee and Thomas. Hi, everyone. This is Tats from Rakuten. So to answer that Kok-Yee's question, in our industry, which is the we have the ecosystem business model, but we focusing on the tech industry, such as e-commerce and fintech and digital content and mobile network. So in that industry, that we have to create a bigger kind of portal site or infrastructure. So through that process, we need to acquire the many startup companies and compile into the one ecosystem. So in that sense, still we are facing the many cultural conflicts, not only the nationalities, but also the kind of typical manners and working style in each different industries. So this is our kind of one of the challenges.
Yeah, and what kind of diversity in your context? A lot, is it mostly on national?
Good point. Thank you. Two perspective. Firstly, nationalities, because the Rakuten is the first company to change the official language, corporate language from Japanese to English in Japan.
Right.
So since 2012, we have started to Englishanization, which is a company-wide change management project. After that, we have at least 20% and above non-Japanese employees in our Japan headquarters. So the nationality is first, and then industrial kind of diversity. This is the second challenges I experienced earlier.
Right. Okay. Any specific issues with that? If you can elaborate, is language or the ways of thinking or the styles of working
Yeah, thank you.
particularly challenging?
Yeah, good question. So my first job in Rakuten is to expand our core value called Rakuten Shugi, which is kind of ism or core values. But that value generated in Japan originally, and we need to expand our core value across globe. But sometimes people feel that, oh, it's not make sense in our region or something like that. So the kind of value connection and bridging, it's a little bit challenging for us. But we try to develop the local, our philosophy facilitators, and then delegate them to expand that our corporate value by themselves. So which is one of the good way to implement our core value to local regions.
That's a really real challenge, right? Because there's the global, and yet how do you have a global and yet adapt it to the local? I can see Stefan joining us. I'm not sure if he can hear us yet. But maybe as we wait for Stefan to...
Hello, Kok-Yee, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. That's fantastic.
Yes.
It's just that we don't see you yet.
That's the next struggle. That's the next struggle I try to address. Sorry about that. I should have a course in technical skills rather than cultural intelligence.
No issue, but since this is a webinar, I think once we can hear you, that's fine. So Stefan, thanks again for joining us. And we are just starting out to set the stage and hear a bit of some industry-specific challenge that you might have observed or trends you might have observed. So maybe could you share a little bit on what you have seen in the workplace and what kinds of diversity and the challenges you think are the most pressing for you?
Yeah, thank you. And again, sorry to you and to all about the delay and about the technical challenges I'm facing now with the camera as the next one. Maybe we'll get there through the program. I think first of all, the topic you are touching is one of the most important ones we have on our agenda here at UBS as well. As we have pre-discussed, we have a big program focused on culture integration. It's actually the title of the program. Maybe some of you may know 2.5 years ago, UBS acquired Credit Suisse, and it was one of the biggest ever happening mergers in the banking industry. And there we realized the question of culture and cultural intelligence from a very different dimension again, which means bringing two corporate cultures together and form one. And that definitely required a very big focus on understanding who UBS is, understanding who at the time Credit Suisse was, where the organizations come from, and try to approach the integration of the two cultures in a way that it would work for those that are taken over, as well as for those that are in the driver's seat for the integration. And I think that was a new dimension which experienced many of us in a very different way, how cultural intelligence really tackles many, many different dimensions. It's not just what we have always experienced, being present in 52 countries, having more than 100 nationalities represented with us, having clients who come from across the world with very different needs, very different backgrounds. We were very used to that approach. And then we also added now, I would say, the muscle of focusing on culture integration when it comes to M&A, which I believe is in many research studies show that it's one of the key failures. When M&A fails, it's very often because leadership styles don't match, because employees don't want to work together with each other, because they have different language, a set of language describe certain things, and now they need to adjust all of that into a new language. And this was a very interesting experience. Maybe a few findings just from a recent employee survey, which we concluded 2.5 years in. We are really proud to see that the responses on sentiment questions, like "I'm proud to work at UBS," for instance, we see 2 percentage points difference on a level of 81 to 79, which to us is more or less, there is no difference anymore. And this is interesting because last year on the same question, we still had a 9-point difference. This year is 2 points. And these are very interesting developments, how we try also to monitor and track how our cultural integration journey works.
Yes, that's fantastic. And in fact, you reminded me of a statistic released by the International Labour Organization years ago. And their statistic was 70% of joint ventures fail because of cultural differences. And I think hearing our two speakers and how this M&A trend is getting more and more prevalent, that this will become even a greater need for crossing cultures. So thanks for sharing your the trend that you are facing. I want to maybe share a piece of science. In the last few years, what I've noticed is there's been a lot of research reports that talk about the importance of diversity. whether it's from the ESG standpoint or the fact, as Stefan, you mentioned, your clients are getting more and more diverse, your stakeholders and more diverse. Research is increasingly touting that more diverse firms tend to perform better. So for instance, if you look at the McKinsey's report, they do find that boards of directors, when boards are more diverse, firm performance, these firms tend to outperform firms where boards are less diverse. And that's great, right? I think we all can see why diversity is helpful. But I also want to bring in a caution, because diversity, as we know, is a double-edged sword. What both of you have mentioned, when you have two different organizations coming together, they see your corporate values very differently. And I like always to cite this 2010 study. So this study is not new anymore, but it is a meta-analysis of 100 studies, more than 100 studies involving more than 10,000 teams. So these are not board of directors, but they're just teams that you would see in organizations. And you'll be surprised to find that the meta-analytic correlation between team diversity and team performance, the correlation is actually close to zero. To be exact, is negative 0.02. Essentially, what it's saying is that diversity has no relationship with performance. And of course, we know that that's because usually you need a third variable to clarify this relationship. So all I wanted to say is diversity is a double-edged sword. Some teams do very well. Some diverse teams perform very well. Some diverse teams perform very badly. And that's why the effects kind of cancel out. So that suggests that we actually need to look at the capability of the teams to handle diversity. So diversity on its own doesn't lead to performance, which is why I think the work on cultural intelligence becomes even more critical. And so with that, maybe Thomas, you want to take over and help us unpack a little bit on what CQ is.
Yeah, I thought that for moving on, before we get more practical insights into how CQ is used in practice, maybe we share a little bit on what we mean by CQ, where it comes from, and what sort of the science of CQ is. So the concept of cultural intelligence refers to the capability of an individual, group, or organization to function effectively in culturally diverse environments. So going back to this idea of culture as being shared rules between different groups, you can think intuitively of CQ as two things. It's a capability to detect what the rules are of a new culture, and then also the capability to make shared rules. So in that context was very interesting what Stefan was talking about earlier, to say you come from very different cultures, but you kind of have to bridge the different cultures in the post-merger. For those interested in reading a little bit on the background of CQ, there are two sort of foundational books. The first published in 2003 by Stanford University Press, so that's more of the scientific basis of CQ. And the second one, published in 2006, also by Stanford University Press, describes more the practical applications of CQ in the workplace. But what is so unique, or what is the value proposition of CQ? It's not that before CQ came along, there was no thinking about what does it mean to cross cultures, but much of the research in the past had taken a very inductive approach to develop what kind of skills or competencies might be needed to cross cultures. And as part of that science, they've come up with more than 300 characteristics that might be relevant to crossing cultures. So it's a completely overwhelming number. It mixes a lot of skills that you can train in people with personality traits that you cannot really change in people. And you always have to ask the question, well, do I need to develop this superhuman being, or where can I find them? And CQ as a concept takes a very different approach. So it draws on the very 100 over years on research on science, on intelligence, to ground that there are basically four fundamental factors that you need to be culturally effective. And so just wanted to show a little bit the simplicity of or coherence of CQ. And when we talk about four factors of CQ, we say four things. So the first one is drive, which is basically our energy or confidence in crossing cultures. We need to have some knowledge of cultural differences and similarities. So that's the knowledge factor of CQ. But knowledge alone often can be a bit stereotypical, so we also need a dynamic capability to adjust our knowledge. So that's where CQ strategy comes in, which is kind of planning before you have intercultural interactions, checking on your plans and being aware during intercultural interactions when your plans work or do not work. And then the last piece that is very important is CQ action. So that's the behavioral repertoire that we have to flex our speech acts, our verbal behaviors, and our nonverbal behaviors. And CQ action is always very, very important because that's ultimately what people from other cultures can see. We will come back a little bit about the role of CQ action later on when we discuss maybe the future of CQ in the context of AI and large language models a bit more. But the research has shown CQ to be a very powerful predictor of important outcomes. So again, a meta-analysis, and we always like to compile many, many studies to see what is the overall effects, show that CQ predicts both decision-making outcomes in intercultural context, how well people adapt to working or living in other cultures, and also various forms of performance on the job. Two things I wanted to additionally highlight is that first, this meta-analysis is mostly done at the individual level and is based primarily on report-based measures of CQ. So report-based measures meaning a short survey that people can fill out to indicate what their level of CQ is. Other ways of measuring CQ in practice and in research include also performance-based measures. So quite a bit of research, for example, using situational judgment tests, or maybe honest signals, kind of tracking behavioral traces of people in the real world to see to what extent they can adjust their behavioral repertoires. And the second piece to highlight is that although this research is done mostly at the individual level, increasingly research is also showing the benefits of CQ at the team and the firm level. So teams who are more culturally intelligent also tend to perform better, and organizations that have certain practices in place that are more culturally intelligent also tend to perform better in international context. So with this kind of setting the overarching importance of CQ in diverse contexts, maybe I want to throw back the question to our speakers to say whether you could perhaps share how in your organizations, your companies are facilitating CQ either through the recruitment, selection, or development in your organizations. And maybe we start with Stefan and then later come to Tats.
Yes, thanks, Thomas. I mean, as always, very interesting to follow these insights. And as you outlined, I mean, Kok-Yee has shared it, you have shared it, Thomas. The point is not that diverse teams are always better, because they're only better under conditions. And we definitely observe that. And many of the participants on the call probably have exactly the same experience. And also what is nice to see is that it's really not just the experience that makes somebody perform well, but it is really the combination of the factors you list out, the reflection, the understanding, the willingness, the motivation. And that is definitely a pattern that is seen again and again in reality. And because it is something people can learn and develop, we definitely invest on this space. I can give you a few very practical examples which we did. First, we did initiate, so we have very standard programs on recruiting, for instance, where all of our recruiters, they have a non-biased training. They have to do that if they want to be a recruiter at UBS. You need to go through this training. There they learn to overcome their own biases, but they also learn how to work with hiring managers, that they may help them to overcome their biases when they are part of the recruiting process. We have diversity, equity, and inclusion training, where the cultural differences aspect is one of the elements, and the motivational aspect, the ability to understand others is another very important aspect. So there are standard trainings which we have for our workforce. Also, when we send people abroad, we do help them with very targeted trainings. But we have done on top, as I shared before, in the integration, we have initiated a cultural integration program that has a very structured approach with very targeted interventions, but also, I would say, for smaller teams, but also for very large teams. We have, for instance, launched a leadership program where we had 18,000 participants over the course of 6 months, where we focused on bringing the two institutions together. And that was exactly to develop this shared culture. That was the main and almost only purpose of that program, where we brought, the goal was all, and we are at 87% of all our leaders went through the same leadership experience, mostly in cohorts of 100, and developed this common understanding. What do we stand for? How do we want to operate together? What is the language we use to describe what our culture is? To really bring people into the language, so to train the same understanding. And what we also felt was very important, to bring people together, that they do experience to discuss with each other. We did 80% of these interactions live and only 20% in virtual settings. And we only chose the virtual settings for people that really worked too far away from any other meaningful size of population, that traveling was not in relation to the duration of the program. Otherwise, we did even fly people together when the travel distances were not too far away. And this really had the pure goal to focus on training, learning to operate together from the various backgrounds people did bring in. Feedback from participants on the programs is exceptionally strong. And I do believe some of the positive results I shared before on the journey we have 2.5 years in is definitely driven by this targeted training intervention that focuses on working together and crossing bridges between different understandings of different people.
Thank you, Stefan. What strikes me in your description is also the overarching amount of both time and the investment that the company is making to develop this competency. So you mentioned that it's like a 6-month training program, so it's quite a substantive time period. Could you maybe speak a little bit to the role of time that it takes in developing CQ?
Yeah, maybe I need to clarify that there's a wrong impression. It was a program that ran for 6 months to train all the 18,000 people. What we do is we had a pre-work that everybody needed to do, and then we had a workshop they all did together, which was, and that I think, and then they had post-work to do, and we had follow-up bringing people together. So it was not that everybody was involved for 6 months, but everybody was involved with pre-work, then the workshop, and then the post-work, and ongoing. And some groups actually established quite some interaction afterwards as well on their own, which was a very nice effect to see as well. One of the key elements in the program, why I believe it was so successful, is because it was leader-led. Me as a group executive board member, I led myself 3 of those programs. My colleagues all did the same. Everybody did at least one. Most did multiple of these programs. And all the programs were either led by GET members or by, we call it GET -1, so the direct reports of GET members, when we rolled it out to all managers. And this definitely gave the organization a very clear signal that this matters. And I think that is an important element, that leaders understand that cultural aspects in the organization and individuals who can, so leaders that can perform well, respecting these cultural elements matter. And so from the elements you describe in the CQ concept, the first and most important one to us was to develop a common language, common understanding. So there is one and not 2 cultures. And then from there, you start to operationalize what it means, but also then to discuss where are differences from one place to another, but what does it mean in a UBS way? And of course, that is a bit an easier way as an organization, because you can ask all the people with their different cultural backgrounds to adapt or to bring in their views into a corporate culture. And as we always say, and we try to bring that understanding into the organization, culture in an organization should have global standards and regional practices. And that's how I would describe the CQ aspect. Do leaders understand that there is a global standard we all need to adhere to, but there need to be local practices that bring this culture principles and standards to life. And that's the key focus where we put our emphasis on. And the second key focus was definitely on creating an understanding why some people need more time to adjust and how can we help them. For instance, common language. We were very, very practical in language. So basically giving them things to say and things not to say. So for instance, not former Credit Suisse. That is not a nice word to hear when you are a former Credit Suisse employee. That's why we shouldn't talk about them and us. Yeah. So we choose a new language that brings us together versus language that separates. And these very practical, I would say, training hints, I believe were most appreciated by managers, because sometimes it's the very practical, in the moment skills and habits that help them.
Yeah, I think, Stefan, you're definitely right that actually a lot of the rules we're talking about are the very specific rules, right? It's not the big things, but even just the language we use, and also the importance of leader-led. That when the top management really takes a serious effort in championing. I do have a question which we'll talk about later. What happens if senior management is not, is not taking this seriously? But I'll come to that later. Maybe we can hear from Tats. What about from Rakuten, some of the strategies that you have for growing CQ?
Yep, thank you. So, yeah, the CQ concept is very connected with our business strategy, because as I mentioned earlier, our business model is the kind of Rakuten ecosystem to make the synergy beyond each single industry among fintech, commerce, mobile, something like that. So in that sense, we need to have the common direction and identity to connect each other to make the innovation or synergies. So in that sense, that everyone in Rakuten needs to develop our CQ capability. And originally, of course, that talent acquisition perspective, we focused on the IQ and EQ. But beyond that, as a company-wide, we need to create that more team working effort. So in that sense, the CQ is very kind of suitable for Rakuten. So I found that concept and tried to kind of make the different path to implement into Rakuten. So can I show my slide?
Yes, please. Can you share?
Okay. The bureau team stopped that slide sharing, so it could be helpful.
Okay, sorry, let me stop.
Thank you. So initially, I truly appreciated Kok-Yee's input. We had a learning session with Kok-Yee to understand the entire CQ framework first. And our team understand that overall structure and also put the order in our terms, starting from the embrace the differences with the motivation for the different culture or aspect, and also observed objectively, which means analyze that current cultural gap and also try to take that suitable action strategically. So this is the fundamental flow and our initial overall picture to develop our employees CQ capability. And that one of the amazing way is to make our employees experience virtual reality, to stand on the other side. If the person is the Japanese, they need to understand the non-Japanese perspective. And if the person is the international employees, they need to understand why the Japanese employee think like that. So in that sense, we try to collect that cultural conflict in the single project from our employees, and try to shoot with a 360-degree camera and make them experience from different angle, and then have them some debates each other. So it's a good exercise for them to have the aha moment, to stand on the side. And kindly, Kok-Yee and Thomas provide us some kind of measurement structure, and we try to collect the survey from the participants and how they could transfer to the team mindset from their individual mindset, because most of the participants are the acquired companies employees. So we need to involve them toward the same direction. And after that, we provide some hint to evaluate the culture differences. And also at the end, we need to provide more practical way in the daily work. So we try to list some inclusive language to make that workplace inclusive with using inclusive language. So we utilize this list to ask the participants what's the better words to make the inclusive workplace. So when we acquired a new company, sometimes the people say, oh, we acquired that company and which became the subsidiary. But no, it's a group company or family company or something like that. We can switch the language to make the atmosphere inclusive. So this is more practical actions under the CQ. So we try to provide such practical example for our employees and make them think what's we can do for the inclusive working culture further. And we try to embed such CQ concept into the more practical way. So this is the way to implement to the Rakuten organization.
Wow.
Thank you, Tatsai. I think it's very wonderful that you also show the small examples of how shifts in language and focusing on a shared culture among the Rakuten is a very, very important step in creating that bridging between. I think there's some similarity between what Stefan was describing for UBS and what you are implementing for Rakuten as well.
And I would say that VR is also a very powerful way. I mean, when we talk about the 4-factor CQ, empathy and perspective taking is definitely an important part of CQ strategy, being able to read the minds of the other person or try to empathize. And I thought that was just a very powerful way that you've done it through technology. So that's great. I have a few very specific questions from the audience that I've looked at. So I'm not sure if this applies to you, but there was a question about working from home, because these days, people like to work from home, which means it takes away the physical interactions between people. And I'm not sure if either of you have observed that, or maybe work from home is no longer something you practice, but I think that the essence is the ability to, how important do you think it is for people to actually see one another physically in office, and that in creating a more culturally inclusive environment?
Yeah, maybe I can start.
Sure.
And this is a very, very interesting development and an ongoing debate. And for those in the banking industry, the industry in itself has a very interesting dynamics, because it always stayed on. So banking services always stayed on during the pandemic. And interestingly, most banks were very, very capable to perform their services completely remotely during the pandemic. And I mean, I remember within 2 weeks, we created virtual onboardings with having new hires and new clients without really having to physically meet. And all that was then possible. So technically, working completely remotely is possible. People then develop new habits. Organizations after the pandemic shutdowns were enabled to work that way, and they also continued to support their workforce that way. And in our industry, about a year or 1.5 years ago, a big change in philosophy happened. Many large banks asked their people to come back full time, and most banks have implemented a minimum return to office. We have that as well. We have a minimum of 3 days in the office, and for senior leaders, we expect to be in the office more. And the reason why we did that is not because we don't trust people, but it's because what we see over time, you need interactions between people that are much more than organized on a Zoom call or on a Teams call, but they need to have this informal getting together, this listening to each other because you sit next to each other. And in particular, it's important from a culture building perspective, because if you want to have, culture development requires spending time with each other. Otherwise, you don't develop similarities, and you also don't have the possibility to work on differences to create these effects of cross-culture effects, as you outlined before. You need to have enough interaction time. And the other element is one that was very important to us, is for more junior staff, you need to observe and watch more experienced people, how they operate and how they do their job.
Right.
And if you don't see that and just meet occasionally in structured meetings, the learning effects are significantly smaller. So it is really about culture building and learning and development. That was the key driver why we say you need to spend enough time with each other. So we still offer the partial flexible work. Our approach is office-centric with flexibility. That's how we call it. And that, I mean, it's interesting. This always causes quite intense conversations within the workforce when you change the policy from very flexible to a little bit more directed. We try to explain it to people, but then of course in reality, if you have longer commutes, the practical reality in your life might at times overrun your intellectual understanding of why it might be necessary. But I have to say, by now, some of the noise that happened when we implemented the new changes also disappearing, and people understand why it's necessary, and they understand that if there's a company policy, that is also how people should operate.
Right. Yeah. I think that's thanks for sharing that. And yes, I think coming together, that's where culture gets stronger. You build the shared rules together, and it's also how the new people learn. And that's how culture is transmitted through the observation. So thank you, Stefan. And Tats, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, thank you. So from the onboarding process for new joiners or HR development perspective, we need to share that cultural or organizational norms to the new joiner or new organizations. So in that sense, we need to keep the breathing space, such as chatting or discussing about the background, which is not directly connected with the meeting agenda.
Right.
So through that casual conversation, we can understand, oh, this is his or her kind of policy or values, and oh, this is that the cultural norms of this organization or something like that. So if we have the only online meeting, once we complete the whole agenda, hey guys, let's wrap up this meeting.
Yeah.
Bye. Boom. So this is no breathing space, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
in that sense, to make someone on board or develop junior people with the mature staff, so we need to keep that breathing space. So in that sense, if we need to keep that online meeting, we can secure one of the agenda or follow-up time to discuss more casually. Or, of course, that I could understand that most of the tech giants try to come back to the office, return to office 5 days per week or something like that. So it makes sense. They want to protect such precious time for employees for better return on investment or productivity.
Yeah.
This
Thanks.
is my observation.
Yeah. Right. So indeed, I think the spontaneity that you get when people are together, whether it's for relationship building or even just ideas that may spark very spontaneously, we don't get that much from working from home or virtual. I do have just one quick question that I see coming in. And the question is, how is cultural diversity different from managing team dynamics? And is diversity driven more by individual predispositions than the ethnicity that the person originates from? I think my quick reaction to that question would be diversity can come from, it's not just ethnicity or country. Like I said, even within a person, it could also be professional, organizational, or, just how I've been brought up. So diversity or the differences in rules, if you just think about how different people have different rules in terms of working or planning, and when you put these people with different rules together, you would have certain dynamics. And of course, if they share the same rules, work gets easier. But if they share very different rules, then that's where you get the dynamics of misunderstanding and conflict. So I think team dynamics is more of a process and an outcome of diversity. They are not the same or different. That's how I would, and it could be individual, even personality, if you think about it. We might be two Singaporeans, females, and everything is the same, but we can still have very different personalities, and that will still lead to challenges in working together. Maybe my last question. Oh, sorry, Thomas, you want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to add on and then maybe also throw a question back to both Stefan and Tats. I think one thing that maybe makes it a little bit different from your individual personality difference is that because the rules that we learn from a cultural point of view, they become much more implicit and habitual. And we then sort of expect other people to play by the same rules, but if they do not, and it creates this kind of a violation of our expectation or of the norms that we expect people to work by. There's a lot of justice dynamic or unfairness dynamic that may be evoked from a cultural angle that may not be evoked from like a personality difference, right? So if I'm a more extroverted or more introverted person, I expect you to have some difference on that. But if I have a certain cultural standard to work by and you are not playing by the same work standard, I may feel like, oh, why is this person not doing the right thing, so to speak, right? And so this culture always invokes a lot more fairness concerns and when they're violated. And maybe to hear from the two of you to what extent you are having experiences of that or managing some of the injustices that people might feel in cross-cultural sort of interaction spaces.
Yeah, let me go first. I'm not sure this is that answer to your question, but recently I need to take that responsibility on the talent acquisition section. And I try to be mindful about the background of that candidates. And one thing that which growing stage of the previous company. So large company, small company, or expandable phase, or kind of revitalizing phase, or pure startup. So they might be influenced from that such environment and develop their own norms or way of working. This is very critical to adjust our corporate culture. And also what kind of industry they are working for. If they are that automotive industry or some other infrastructural industry, they need to protect the secure or security standpoints. But that industry is entertainment or other industry, they might need to be more agile or kind of fun fact they need to create. So that expected value is totally different and their skill set might be developed according to that industrial expectation. So we are so mindful to check that points and also we need to describe our norms or policy and then try to validate, oh, this is adjustable or not. So this point might be very important, not only talent acquisition perspective, but also internal transfer. Now we are facing the great resignation era. So we need to promote internal mobility. So in that sense, we need to check that point. So otherwise we might have much more cultural conflicts, I guess.
I thought that's a wonderful example. And again, if you go back to what CQ is, and it's about detecting rules and then making shared rules. And what Tats is saying is that, yeah, you don't just assume people know how you function, but if someone is from a startup or someone's from an entertainment industry, their rules or their ways of thinking would be very different from a tech company, for instance. So I think back to this question about how do we manage team dynamics when people are very different? I think we just come back to this idea of culture. First is really acknowledging if there are differences in rules, that people have their own rules. Are you able to detect it? And I think importantly, as a leader, as we've heard from both Tats and Stefan, how then do you make common shared rules for your team members so that they know how to behave, right? It could be just the language we use. You know, don't use you and I, we go with we, or that is example of one rule that you can help people to understand. This is how the team should work together. So thanks for that example. And Stefan, do you have any other thoughts on maybe how teams?
Yep. I think one element, and I know you and your colleagues are doing a lot of research on that as well, is the importance of feedback loops. I think that is really one of the key drivers of building a common understanding and building alignment and expanding on what you know or what you believe others think about you, and having the opportunity to give structured feedback in that, and also in an organizational context. We do, for instance, an annual so-called line manager effectiveness survey, which is a bottom-up survey of 15 very specific questions. So my line manager does X, and then we say we have 15 very, very tangible questions of behaviors we would like to see at yes. And then there's bottom-up feedback, which every line manager gets, by the way, including the CEO. And I also get feedback from my team. And I get a score on these 15 questions for each question on average, and categorized in 3 different categories. And this is definitely I would say the systematically established feedback loops, also with established performance feedbacks and so on. It's extremely important to create a shared understanding of what matters, but also how we want to operate. And at UBS, we have introduced in 2015 a dual rating for our performance feedback. And both ratings are relevant for promotion eligibility, and they are also impacting compensation, so incentive payments. And the one is the contribution, that's rating number 1, and rating number 2 is behavior. And behavior is the behaviors we have in our culture framework, which is called the 3 keys. In our logo, there are the 3 keys. There, the UBS logo, and therefore we have the 3 keys as our enabling organizational culture driver. And there are 3 behaviors which are describing what matters most, and this is evaluated systematically in performance reviews. So I do believe that the implementation of culture language in standard practices like hiring interviews, performance reviews, compensation decisions, promotion decisions, and the establishment of systematic feedback loops can be institutionalized support systems to create a common culture and increase individual culture coefficient, so increase CQ on individuals.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. So we can have rules, but if we don't enforce the rules, we don't give feedback on the rules, and if we don't reward on people who follow the rules or break the rules, then I think the rules mean nothing. So I think what I hear from Stefan is really the importance of measurement, feedback for development, but also in a way recognizing when people do display the behaviors that you expect them to behave. And I think that's how also then we build a stronger organizational culture or a set of shared rules that represent UBS or that represent Rakuten, and of course that represent your organization. So thank you for that. My last question for this segment, and I think then we'll move very quickly to the future. There is one question which I'm not sure if Tats or Stefan can answer because I don't think they fit you. But there is one question on what happens if senior management does not take CQ seriously. Like I said, Tats and Stefan, you've both shown how serious your organizations take CQ. But I've also seen, I mean, in the course of our work at the center, we've got lots of requests for companies to do this, or why don't you come and give us a half-day workshop, one-day workshop? And I see a range of leaders, right? Some are really serious, and some are just more like ticking off the checkbox. And I don't know if you have anything to say to that. You have any suggestions on how senior management can take it more seriously? I have some thoughts, but I want to hear from you first, if you have any.
Maybe I can try to start. As you say, we do our utmost best that they do understand the importance and therefore do take it serious. Because it's interesting, senior managers want to be successful. And if they are supported with a feedback system, they will always improve on where they have weaknesses, and they will continue to drive on their strengths, because that is what is making them ultimately successful. If there is a lack of feedback, then it can happen that they behave in a way that is not responding well with the majority or with larger parts of the organization, or with some important individuals. And then I believe you have what you see then, and the picture I use there in top executive trainings is, if you are the leader, you can see yourself as the engine at the train. So you're the front engine that's pulling the rest. You can also sometimes you need to be at the end and push, and sometimes you need to balance out. But if you see yourself that way, and then there is no matter how if you want to achieve a lot, you don't just need to drive very fast, but you need to ensure that your wagons are connected to the engine machine and they are connected to each other. Because otherwise what can happen is that you as a leader, you move and the rest of the organization stays where they are because they are not connected enough. And that's, I believe, a picture I try to bring to senior leaders, that they constantly check, is their train composition connected well, so that when something moves, everything moves. Because that's in my view the impact of leadership. You need to ensure that you have an aligned movement in the organization. Of course, sometimes some parts can be faster, others slower. You need to have innovation. You need to have test units. They experiment, and others are in highly controlled environments. But all together, the organization needs to move in an aligned and connected way. And that, from a CQ perspective, is very, very important. I have seen leaders that were not focused enough on, in particular, newly joining leaders from the outside world, not focusing enough on understanding if they connect to the existing ecosystem. And they just continue to show the behaviors that made them successful in another organization. And these leaders either adapted or failed. If you don't adapt early enough, established organizations with strong cultures, they will reject leaders who do not integrate to a certain extent. And hopefully they have a willingness to adjust to another certain extent to benefit from new leaders who bring in new ideas and can shape the organization. But I think here again, the feedback loops are extremely important to help leaders to connect. And to close, I believe organizational cultures of well-established organizations is typically stronger than individual leaders, no matter which seniority they have, to then outperform over a leader that doesn't adjust or adapt in the culture environment.
Yeah, so I think, again, I think leaders all want to succeed. The question is, can we help them see why CQ is important for their success? And I think, as Stefan, you said, if they can see that they all want to do well, and if they can see why this is important for them, I think they will take it more seriously. The other observation I have is, when you show leaders the data and the evidence of why it matters, then people do sit up a bit more than to say, oh, this is one of the nice to have, but not important. I'm conscious of time, so I think let's just move on very quickly to wrap up with a last question on the future of CQ and AI. Any thoughts from our speakers on how AI is do you think it can replace, or how do you see AI coming in to affect all that we've just talked about in terms of diversity? Maybe a quick word from Stefan, Tats, and also get Thomas to share a little bit.
Yeah, and then also very interested to hear, because AI is certainly a big driver also at Rakuten, given me as a user, how I see how they are driving me based on my prior behavior into my future behavior. But I do believe, from a CQ perspective, AI is extremely important, because it is almost like a new player in the game. To learn to manage teams that are constituted of machines and people. And these machines, these bots, they operate in a certain way. And that's important to integrate into how we operate in an organization or in a small team. And leaders also need to understand how to operate best with these machines. So it's how do they influence my work processes? How do they influence team dynamics? And these are extremely important elements to focus explicitly on it. And I think CQ thinking is exactly the right approach how to look at this. Because to me, an agent that helps me to perform my job is almost like another element in my interaction space that needs to be included in team dynamics, culture building, and so on. And therefore, I think it's. I mean, what types of prompts do you train your machine with, and so on? These are all very important elements which have a very big cultural implication as well.
Thank you. Tats, anything to add?
Yeah, so still I'm learning and kind of forecasting what's happening around AI. But I've heard that recently that Harvard Business Review provided a new white paper about that topic, but the people are aware with that kind of not diverse input into the generative AI. So that the algorithm or most of the input given from, for example, Western area region or English content. So in that sense, that machine learning doesn't work well balanced.
Yeah.
So in that sense, we need to kind of compile that balanced information and educate our AI and try to receive that well-balanced output from them. So that kind of effort we need to pay for the AI.
Right. Building culturally intelligent AI, right? And not AI that. So CQ also works for AI. They need to be culturally intelligent. Thomas, last thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to say a couple. I totally echo what Tats was saying, right? About the need to bring in more culturally diverse information into the AI that we are using to make it more broadly based across different cultures. But I think the one other thing I also wanted to highlight, because we talked about CQ as a comprising in the behavioral sense, both nonverbal, verbal behavior, also speech acts. Today's LLMs are very, very much language-based or textual-based, right? But the CQ comprises a lot more than just what kind of textual inputs to use. So a lot of the nonverbal behaviors that are also very important, that maybe over time AI can also learn, but at this point in time, the focus is not really on that part so much.
So adding on to that, a lot of our real intent and how we feel comes through our nonverbal and verbal, not text. And so AI would have to, and I know there are already multimodal AIs that look at gestures and all that, but I think in the future they will get even more powerful, and I think that will be important. Well, I think we have reached it's 12:35, and I want to thank you again for the wonderful sharing. Thank you, Tats, and thank you, Stefan, and a big thank you to our audience. Thank you for tuning in, and we've reached the end of the session. So there's the last, oh, sorry, I have a slide here. If you're interested in the past webinars, you can do this QR code and there will be a short survey that'll be sent to you. So do share with us your feedback. So thanks so much again. I really want to thank our speakers, and so have a wonderful day. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.